Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you are entering into the combat zone, where the enemy has only one of four things to say. Take cover, bail out, abandon ship, or we surrender.
So proud of him.
I know. I had Nick confused, actually, beforehand. He was working on... Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate the applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Pregnant pause.
Yeah, we're waiting for you to finish the intro.
That was the intro.
Yeah, I know, but you're supposed to lead the conversation off after the intro.
I thought I did.
See what I have to work with, folks. See what I have to work with.
Okay. Thank you to Tom Harris, who had his first live show at 8 p.m. And I don't know how many people were listening in, but I'm sure it was exciting. And we're glad to have Tom as part of our repertoire, our stable.
Ever-growing stable of voices.
Our growing stable of voices.
You realize we just doubled the output of the website by 100%?
Well, okay. Yeah, something like that.
Well, anyway, the point I wanted to make was I listened to the interview as well as when it was just played here. And I got to tell you, Tom has a knack for this. He's got a gift. I listened to the interview, and that's, to the best of my knowledge, his first interview in a setting like this. And, Tom, you did a great job. You really did. It was smooth. It was well done. And it was interesting, to put it mildly. The half hour just flew by. So I certainly look forward to hearing what else you have in store for us in the coming weeks.
Okay, so we're doing a bit of a different format starting tonight. Our show is actually going to be 1 hour instead of 2 hours to make it a little easier on you guys in our listening audience. And so, look, let's get right into it, Nick. You have the first segment, so let's talk a little bit about Canadians and immigration.
Well, you've heard that the governments keep saying we have to increase immigration. We have to increase immigration. I'm just looking for his name. Ahmed Hussein says he understands some Canadians may be worried about the ability of communities to absorb newcomers due to housing and other infrastructure shortage. In other words, he's building the government's case for yes, it's uncomfortable, but we need these people. That's completely counter to what the Canadian people actually want. So let me share with you something from the latest, I believe it was Ipsos, who did the poll. Yeah, Ipsos polling. The latest polling.
Let's call it the latest polling.
There you go.
By the way, before you read that, Nick, okay, I can't help but mention that the idea about being uncomfortable because of infrastructure, housing, etc., that's the only place that you, our dear listeners, have heard that is here.
That is
because
true.
I don't think I've heard or read anybody talking about infrastructure in the context of immigration, or immigration in the context of infrastructure.
And yet you would think it's one of the most basic things.
Right.
Because, look, whether you agree with the way things are being done right now or not, when someone comes over our border, there are certain requirements we have as human beings. One is to make sure, they have a place to stay, they have something to eat, and they have, we take care of the basics of life for them. Because whether they're, no matter how they got here, they're still human beings, and they need to be taken care of. Now, with that said, okay, you can argue all day about how much is the right amount, what we should do at the border. That's a conversation for another day. But I want to share with you a little bit of this Ipsos Reid poll. The latest one I can find is dated June 16th, so it's not that old. Here's what. Let me read you just some of the numbers out of this article. It's from the CBC, which is a reliable source, I know. New polling numbers suggest a majority of Canadians believe the federal government should limit the number of immigrants it accepts, a public opinion trend that Immigration Minister Ahmed Hussein says he finds concerning. 63% of respondents to a recent, Leger Leger poll said the government should prioritize limiting immigration levels because the country might be reaching a limit in its ability to integrate them. Just 37% said the priority should be on growing immigration to meet the demands of Canada's expanding economy. And in a nutshell, what that's saying is immigration should be done for the good of the country, not the good of the immigrant. Because if you do it for the good of the country, the immigrant benefits because they come to a better place. And it gets better over time. So these kind of things, I think, if you read between the lines a little bit here, that's what Canadians are saying, at least according to this poll. Just 37% said that the priority should be on growing immigration and to meet the demands of Canada's expanding economy. You know something? I think there's a myth here. And that myth is that we absolutely must have immigration in order to fill jobs nobody else wants. All right. There's two. If you find a job market that is pro-employee versus pro-employer, in other words, it's easy to find work because there's plenty of opportunities out there. Jobs are not scarce; they're easy to find. Now, they might not be $75,000, $80,000 a year jobs with all the bells and whistles that go with that, but there's jobs out there if you want one. So anyway, there's two reactions to that. One is to open the doors further to immigration. But the more people you bring in a given time period, the harder it is to know who it is that's coming through the door. And that's my big problem with this. It's not that I don't want immigration. I've always believed in immigration, but for the good of the country, not the immigrant. Now, the other attitude is to slam the door shut, increase things like baby bonus, because if we're not spending billions of dollars housing, feeding, and putting clothes on the back of refugees, or I hate to use the word refugees because there's no such thing as a refugee coming to Canada. They have to go, the only place they can come from is the States, and it's not a third world country, therefore they can't claim refugee status. That said, you can slam the door shut and take the money you were spending it on housing, feeding, and clothing these people, and turn that back around into tax breaks and incentives for young families to have more children. Yes, it'll take 18 to 20 years to see the fruit of that. But you know something? 20 years ago, what was it, 1999? Yes, 1999 was 20 years ago. It went by like that. It's as much as it sounds like it's a long time. In one way of measuring it, it is. But in another, understand this as well, that a lot of these lower income jobs, if we start having our own kids and they start looking for work, guess who's going to fill those jobs? Now, if you can't fill those jobs, innovation will take over because companies won't go out of business just because they can't find help. I say they won't. I mean, in a general sense, I'm sure there's some that say, you know what, the hunt just isn't worth it. I'm looking for my exit strategy anyway, and they'll bow out. And those jobs will be lost because that business will close. But that is not normally the case. Usually these people are entrepreneurial and they want to keep their business alive. So if it means automating, they will do that and eliminate the need for that job in the first place. So now they don't have the manpower shortage. They'll do things like allow people to work from home. There'll be all kinds of different perks and benefits. And understand, a job market that has great demand by the employer for employees is a benefit to whoever is out there looking for a job because they're a little bit more in the driver's seat now. So you have somebody like my son, 18 years old, just left home, okay, like in the last week. He's now living on his own. He started his own life. All right. Well, he's got several opportunities he can take advantage of. He's got his pick of jobs. In other words, he can work. Now, he's going to make about $15 an hour. Nobody's going to take an 18-year-old kid and pay him $24 an hour.
Okay, but this is supposed to be about immigration.
It is. It is. It's all tied together. Immigration levels. I think the whole reason I got into this was because to help dispel this myth that we need immigration to fuel the economy, to be the willing hands working in the economy.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, I know that that's what these guys say. And by the way, I generally agree with you. But look, I don't think we have to have massive immigration to grow the economy. I'm not into the fetish of growth in GDP every year, and if we don't achieve a certain GDP growth, then oh my God, the economy is coming crashing down. What really concerns me, Nick, is what I see as a growing backlash. I think it's fair to say that there is this incipient backlash to large-scale, virtually unrestricted immigration. And what really bothers me is that the elites are blaming the people who are feeling like they want to push back against unrestricted immigration for being racist, for being xenophobic, for being anti-immigrant, and without taking the responsibility themselves for having created a situation where people are genuinely uncomfortable and concerned about the high levels of immigration. And it's not because immigrants don't assimilate well, and it's not because they're violent and committing all of these crimes, okay? And I know assimilation may be a problem, but the real issue is, like it or not, the population, the Canadians who are here now, are feeling, many are starting to feel uncomfortable for whatever reasons. And when you've noticed that people are starting to feel uncomfortable, that it's a prudent thing to maybe dial it back a little bit. You know, just reduce the flow of immigrants coming into the country just a little bit so that people start to feel comfortable again. I think that they're feeling a little overwhelmed, and whether that's justified or not is hardly the question. And I think that the government, you know, and when the minister talks about racism and he talks about xenophobia and he talks about all of these things, it's really insulting, okay? And I would say, look, to the government, look, you guys have created this situation where there is a growing concern. And, you know, if we had somewhat more moderated levels of immigration, because most Canadians, in fact, I think virtually all Canadians are pro-immigration. I think, you know, my parents are immigrants, Nick, you know, so same with, you know, your relatives. So we're all generally descended from immigrants. I don't think immigration is the problem here. I think that the high levels are a potential problem, and I think that if anybody is feeling bad or feeling that we should have lower levels, that's not because they're intolerant. That's because they're just uncomfortable. And the reason they're uncomfortable is because the government has just gone ahead and pushed, I think for ideological reasons, very high and unsustainable levels of immigration. That's it, pure and simple.
Just to be clear, I wasn't in support of what the government was doing. I was only laying out the case.
I get you. I believe you, Nick.
Yes. I'm.
This is a liberal government. How could you think that I would think that you support them?
Very good point. Very valid point.
Especially under Justin Trudeau.
The only way I'd support them is with a trip to the airport. I'd even drive. Anyway, the point I was trying to make was you said a lot of what I was going to say. Canadians are feeling intimidated. Maybe uncomfortable is not quite strong, the word I would use. I think it's more intimidated by this flood of people who have, there's a lot of them have nothing in common with us, don't hold the same belief systems that we do. We see them coming in, and it looks like they're taking over. Now, that's not the reality, but the truth is perception is reality. And how people perceive a problem is the problem that you have to tackle if you're a government. And I think that they've really either dropped the ball or are simply just too arrogant to listen to the average Canadian about how they feel about this, because it's our tax dollars that's paying for it.
Well, if I had to sum it up in just one sentence, I would say, Nick, I wish that the government was as sympathetic to Canadians who are here already, including you Canadians, as they are to people who are not here who want to get in. I wish they had the same kind of sympathy for them.
Parting shot. The government just gave away $200 million to foreign governments to help them with climate change. Now think about that when you're struggling to make paycheck to paycheck. I know it doesn't have anything directly to do with it, but it fits into why we don't have any money.
Okay. That's the end of round 1 in our new super fast format. Try not to laugh, Nick.
I'm doing my best.
Okay, get ready, Nick. You are going to not be happy with the next story. Okay? And you're going to think, first of all, you're going to say, this is stupid and crazy. I get it. But wait till you hear the whole story. You're just going to go over the deep end, Nick.
All right.
Okay, so my topic for this second segment, Nick, is the city of Halifax is debating banning drive-through, fast food drive-through, like
like a Timmy's or a Wendy's or
Tim
a Hardee's.
Hortons, McDonald's, A&W, Burger King. I have to be careful to try to name all of them because
we
might
just call
get
them fast
sued
food
for-
outlets.
Let's call them fast food. Although I don't know if you've noticed, but fast food places aren't all that fast anymore. At least that's what my wife tells me.
Yes, they've forgotten what the word fast means.
This is what I'm told. So anyway, yeah, the city of Halifax, seriously, ladies and gentlemen, is considering passing a bylaw banning fast food outlets from having drive-throughs. Now, why, Nick, do you think the reason is?
Oh, let me guess. It has something to do with a slightly warmer planet. Am I right?
Nick, you have nailed it.
My God.
The reason is because the government is wants to make sure that we're dealing with the CO2 emissions, etc., coming from cars that are idling at these drive-throughs. Well, that's the reason, Nick. You hit it a nail right on the head.
Well, that's the reason they do most of the things these days. It has nothing to do with what's good for the public. It has not. First of all, it's none of their business if a private business wants to run a drive-through. That's none of their affair. They're meddling in areas they should have no jurisdiction in. And to pass a bylaw against a private business for making that business easier to access, like if you're you pull into your favorite fast food restaurant. Okay, let's say you pull into a Timmy's because that's nationwide. Everybody knows it. I'm not intentionally leaving anybody else out, but in this case, we'll use Timmy's as the archetypical fast food restaurant. All right, just so I don't have to watch every word I say. So you pull into your Timmy's and you have, let's say you're a paraplegic, and to get out to go in and get a coffee is a big deal for you. Because you've got one of those special vans with the ramp and the wheelchair. And it's not like just getting out like, a normal. And when I say normal, I don't mean that they're abnormal. It's just that, oh, my God, I'm talking in circles. You know what I mean. It's not the same as you or I getting out of a car. It's a big process.
Stop trying to be politically correct.
Yeah, I know. And that's why I said I'm flushing that whole nonsense. They have a bigger challenge getting out of their vehicle than we do. And the drive-through allows them to participate in that without having to have that hassle.
Okay, so and let's be very clear about things. Okay, drive-throughs do not just include fast food restaurants anymore. There's your drive-through banking. Let's not forget drive-through banking. Drive-through liquor stores are starting to pop up here and there. There's lots and lots of hey, if you go down to the United States, drive-through pharmacies. Now, here's the thing. I'm not an expert. So I don't know the answer to this, and maybe somebody out there does. But I do know that when you turn on your lights, turn your lights on and off, in fact, you end up using more electricity than if you left them on. Now, obviously, there's a
window there.
A point in time where
that's no longer true.
The lights on all the time, okay, and never turn them off. Of course, you're using more electricity. But if you walk into the room for 5 minutes, turn the lights off, walk back in 5 minutes later, turn the lights on, and you're doing that, fairly
all day
consistently,
long,
then you actually end up using more electricity than if you just left the lights on in the first place and didn't turn them off. So I'm wondering whether or not that's the same with cars. I suspect very strongly, Nick, that if you turn your car off for the 5 minutes to walk into your local Tim Hortons, order a coffee, walk back out to the car, get in the car, turn the car back on, I'm willing to bet that you use more fuel in that 5-minute window, even though the car was off, than if the car had been just running steady, idling for 5 minutes. And I will bet you that you create more emissions. And I don't want anyone out there to think that I'm saying that, greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 and all that stuff, we have to stop that. Okay, that, as far as I'm concerned, that's just a myth, a hoax, unscientific in the extreme. But set that aside for a second. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, Nick, that those emissions are, in fact, causing climate change. In fact, you are creating, I suspect strongly, more emissions by turning your car off, walking into this restaurant for 5 minutes, get your coffee, walk back out, turn your car on, and when you start it, that's when you have this sudden surge of fuel usage and emissions. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that would be what the outcome would be. I don't know if
I can tell you right now you're right. And the reason...
You used to be a trucker there.
Well, I was also a mechanic in the Navy for 10 years. And it always takes more energy to put something into motion than it does to keep it in motion. And in this case, we're talking about the car's engine. And you're going to have... as a matter of fact, if you have to stop, park, then you have not only the engine to restart, but you have to put energy into moving the car down the road. Now, granted, that kind of negates itself with the drive-in, because the drive-in, you're not getting any speed up anyway.
No, but there's more maneuvering, and
you're right.
The parking and getting into the parking spot.
I used to know what the number was, but there was a number. Let's take when I was driving truck, that it made more sense to leave the truck running than it did to shut it off, because it wasn't shut off long enough to see any savings. I'm just backing up what you just said, is that there's a certain amount of kinetic energy the engine doesn't have to lose, so it's more efficient. Now, again, there is a window. Like, don't think that that's going to work if you leave the truck running overnight. Okay, sooner or later you pass that benchmark, and then it's all lost. But if you're just, let's say you're running into the bathroom, so you pull into a truck stop, you park the truck, you pop the air brakes, you run inside, you go to the bathroom, you run back out and jump in the truck, and the whole thing takes you a minute and a half, 2 minutes if you scrub behind your ears. Okay? That engine takes more to start it than it would take to idle for that minute and a half. So it's a negative. But to get back to this whole thing, my problem with this not only is the nonsense about climate change, that goes without saying, but they are impeding and intruding on private business for no real reason. They just want to do their fuzzy feel-good things. They want to be a leader, so they're going out and making these ridiculous nonsense.
Feel-good things, Nick.
You got it. That's exactly what that is. Oh, that sound is so soothing. Anyway, but they're messing around in an area. Look, Nova Scotia's only got 960,000 people in it. There are more people in Ottawa than there are in the whole province of Nova Scotia.
Now, we're not talking about all of Nova Scotia.
Yes, we are.
No, we're talking about Halifax.
I know that, but I'm saying in all of Nova Scotia, there's only 960.
Okay, I get you.
Halifax is down around 200,000 or 300,000, but it's a little smaller than London. Okay, London, Ontario. So the point is, what do you think they're going to accomplish? And why would you make it harder on people and the people who run your economy and generate the taxes you need to be able to operate that government? Why would you do that? Unless it's nothing but virtue signaling. Unless you think that this is such a critical issue and you want to be seen as somebody standing up for the planet, and you've got your Captain Green Save the Planet uniform on with blowing in the wind, and you get your little mask on, and you're going to save the planet, man. You're Captain Planet. So you're going to make sure that it's even more difficult.
Is that an actual superhero?
If it isn't, I wouldn't be. I'm surprised they haven't made a movie about it yet.
Captain Planet.
Captain Planet. If there isn't, maybe we should trademark it.
Now, I want to know what happens when we have electric cars.
It's the same thing. Same principle applies.
Now, 100% for sure, turning off your electric car and then restarting it within 5 minutes or 10 minutes is going to use more electricity.
Of course. You ever say
100%?
Yeah, because when...
Well, no, I don't know if it's 100% more electricity.
No, but 100%, you're right.
I'm right, 100%.
If you
Not
go,
100% of the time.
if you have an air conditioner in your house, and when that thing kicks on, it surges. If you put a meter on it, you'll see the amperage just spike until the unit gets up and running, and then it drops back. Same thing with a Tesla or a Leaf or a whatever tree part they're talking about. You know, these new hybrid or electric cars. No matter what the power source is, once you stop it, then you have to get it going again, and that takes energy. And that doesn't matter whether it's the motor or the whole car going down the highway. That's why stop and go driving is so hard on your car. It's not designed for that.
Okay, dead airspace.
Yeah, I know, because I was going to look something up on Google and trying to remember what it was.
Oh, you were looking something up on Google.
Yeah, well, I found the population of Nova Scotia.
But do you really think? Okay, see now, I'm going to take issue with one thing you said. I don't think that the government doesn't have the right or responsibility to step in and regulate this kind of stuff. They create bylaws all the time, and maybe they overdo it. But when you say that they're interfering in private business, I don't think the government should be barred from interfering in private business.
But this isn't a safety issue. This isn't making sure all businesses are wheelchair accessible, or making sure the bathrooms are set up right so somebody on a wheelchair can use one without too much inconvenience. That's not the same thing. These people are imposing a political, not even a political, but their own personal worldview on people who may or may not share it under the guise of the long arm of the law. And I have a huge problem with that. It's not about safety inspectors coming in to check a meat shop or going in to check a restaurant, make sure they didn't leave the rice out overnight. It's not that at all. This is just them coming in, making life miserable. As a matter of fact, I would love it if somebody who is, handicapped sued the government over this, because they can say, if somebody can say, look, I spilled hot coffee in my lap and I burned myself and I'm suing you for millions of dollars, can win that case, then somebody in a wheelchair can sue the provincial government of Nova Scotia for making the ability to get her double-double or his double-double more difficult.
Now, that brings to mind a very quick short story. Okay, so many years ago, I was selling boilers, and Nick, stop laughing right away. I was selling and pool heaters, and I'm not going to name the line, okay, but there was one line of pool heaters that used to get very hot, and so what they did was they had stamped on the top of it. Whoop! I just hit my microphone. I don't know if that came through as a bang on the. Anyway, so these guys they stamped the top of the pool heater hot. So along comes this lady, and these things were really hot. That's why they stamped them hot. So along comes this lady, and she walks over to the pool heater at the just perfect height for somebody to sit down. So she sits down, and she burns into her backside hot. And she sued the company and won. And so they switched from the warning being engraved or impressed,
right,
to a tag, a paper tag that of course these paper tags would just burn off, and that would be the end.
Yes, but it was tagged when it left the factory, and that's all they have to do is cover themselves.
Right.
But this is the kind of nonsense.
Nobody was worried then about global warming. They were all looking for. Listen, believe me, when you have to heat your pool, you're not worried about global warming.
You got that right. It's just this kind of stuff irritates me because they're making life more difficult they're choking what they're trying to do. They don't realize it, but what they're doing is choking the life out of the goose that lays the golden egg. Okay.
And that's the end of segment number 2. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to go for a short break. So catch your breath. We're out of breath here. Nick has got to have a stroke. Call the ambulance. Okay, we'll be back in the combat zone in a few minutes here on Think Radio.
back to the Combat Zone. I'm Nick. He's Joseph.
You had to think about that.
No, I'm just making sure I said it right.
Right. You had to think about it.
That's right. I do. I try to think before I talk. It doesn't often work, but I try. Anyway, I want to dive into the next topic. And I hope you guys are enjoying this new format. I know I am. It's a little more engaging, I think, and it's a little faster paced. So let's not waste any more words on that. There's been some developments overseas on the international stage, and that centers around Donald Trump and his handling of the Iran crisis. Iran crisis, that takes you back to 1978. The revolution in Iran.
Right. So oh gosh, I don't know what year they took over the embassy at first.
I think it was 78. Anyway, in that era. So the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important waterways in the world. And I think that there's a couple of things that Mr. Trump will never get credit for, even though I believe he should. Number one, his dealing with Iran. He hasn't given an inch, and they're already in trouble. Like, he's just not willing to negotiate with them. Number two, by making the United States energy independent, he doesn't count on the oil from the Strait anymore, from the Strait of Hormuz. In other words, from that Middle Eastern gateway. Now, what that does do is it puts Russia, China, and here we are. All right. And Japan in a real problem. And this is from an article from the New Millennial, dated June 24th.
The post-millennial.
Why did I say new? I knew it was post. All right, anyway.
You're trying to be a millennial.
Oh, God, please spare me. All right. According to Mr. Trump, and I have no reason to doubt these numbers, China gets 91% of its oil from the Strait. Japan gets 62%, and many other countries likewise. So why are we protecting these shipping lanes for other countries for many years for zero compensation? All of these countries should be protecting their own shipping on what has always been a dangerous journey. We don't even need to be there in that the U.S. has just become by far the largest producer of energy anywhere in the world. He's right. In a nutshell.
Are you quoting Donald Trump? That's
yes,
his quote? Yeah.
That's the content of his tweet. Okay, we all know how much Mr. Trump likes to tweet, almost as much as our junior sitting on the throne up here likes to selfie. Anyway, but think about it. If you don't need the oil that comes through that strait, then why are you defending it? Like, why is the U.S. having the fleet parked just outside the Strait of Hormuz with 96 combat aircraft and thousands of sailors and the whole battle group? Because aircraft carriers do not go off on their own. They take a dozen ships with them to protect them from possible attack. So
very true.
He's saying, hey, China, hey, Japan, hey, Russia, it's your oil I'm protecting. Why? You guys have within your capabilities the ability to do the same thing we're doing. We don't need to be there. And I think that is a stroke of genius. To be able to be energy independent means they don't have you over a barrel anymore.
No pun intended.
No pun intended.
Well, that's true, Nick, but I think there's another aspect to this. In fact, two aspects. The first is that consider, first of all, that the United States is the single largest, most powerful military in the world. The United States is the strongest country in the world.
Yep.
Okay? Now, and along with that comes a certain amount of responsibility to exercise that power, to use that power with some degree of wisdom, etc. So I think that's the first thing. That sort of sets things up. So there are two other aspects to this that I don't think you're considering. The first is that the United States is the ally, the principal ally of countries like Saudi Arabia, nowadays Iraq, other Gulf states, and then moving further Jordan, and then Israel. So if we're moving east towards the Mediterranean, so attacking shipping of that the oil that's coming from these countries is an attack on those countries, and so the United States is fulfilling an obligation that it's taken on as an ally of these countries. Now, you could argue, granted, I'll anticipate your response, you could make the argument that there's no reason for the United States to be the ally of these countries because they don't need their oil. Okay, so which brings us to the second aspect of this, and that is that if the United States is not standing behind these countries as an ally, then it's leaving the door open to large regional conflict because other countries do, in fact, want to have access to that energy. And so, really, the best way to keep the peace, generally speaking, including when you're considering China, including when you consider Russia, probably the best way to keep the peace is for the United States to continue to have a strong naval presence there, protecting the shipping for everybody. Now, it's not fair, I grant you that. But, as we've talked about many times, Nick, both on and off the air, the world's not a fair place.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think it's completely legitimate and I'm not saying that the U.S. should pull its military forces from the Middle East. It's a stabilizing force no matter what people say.
That's the word I was looking for, stabilizing.
Well, it is, because if you're going to pick a fight, you're going to have to deal with the big kid on the block. And that's what makes the United States so important in the Middle East. Now, on top of that, or one of the things, on top of that, what's wrong with looking at China, who is rebuilding its Navy anyway? The question would be, what for, if they're not going to protect their own shipping interests through one of the most crucial shipping lanes in the world?
Yeah, I don't think they have an interest in that at all. I think that the reason that the Chinese...
When you get 91% of your oil from a certain area and it narrows down to a point only 21 miles wide, you have an interest.
No, but I don't mean that they don't have an objective interest. I don't think that they're really considering that in terms of building up their Navy. I think that the reason the Chinese are building their Navy up is because they want to project power, particularly in the South China Sea. Mm-hmm. They see that as within their sphere of influence, and that includes Taiwan. We've seen the unrest in Hong Kong over the past week or so. I think that the Chinese are just projecting their power in their own backyard. And while we talk about the Straits of Hormuz as being strategically very important to a number of countries, perhaps not the United States, but in terms of international trade, the shipping lanes throughout the South China Sea and in the South Pacific, between the South Pacific and the Indian Ocean, are critically important to global stability, to economic stability around the world. And so that is where the Chinese, I think, have been calculating that they can have the most influence over
you may be
trade,
right,
etc. So I think that's what they're concentrating their Navy on.
You may be right, but navies are designed to do more than one job at a time. And when someone threatens, because if they can't get oil, it doesn't matter about the Navy because it won't be able to move anyway. It's the same thing that was almost happened to Britain during World War II. They very nearly cut the supply line from North America, and starved them for food and fuel right out of the war. So that tiny little stretch of water, which can be reached from either shore, anti-ship missiles, a few batteries of those makes that a very precarious place. So for China, it is in their national interest, very high up. Maybe it's not as high as the Spratly Islands area, which is what you're talking about. Okay, I get that. But it's number 2. Because if you can't get energy, you can't move. And the Chinese, if they want that fleet to be able to project the power you're talking about, would be reduced to a coastal defense force if they were to have the Straits of Hormuz cut off. The same thing true with Japan, because Japan has no oil of its own that I'm aware of. Certainly not very much if it does. Not enough to do the kind of to run that economy. So I think Donald Trump has a huge ace to play. He can even do something as simple as saying, all right, fine, we'll continue what we're doing, but we're going to send you a bill. Or they can use it in leverage in trade wars.
I think that's fair. I don't know about trade. I don't think there's a whole lot of trade.
No. The point is, when you have a trade disagreement with China, as an example, like having now,
right?
He could say, look, we'll defend the Straits of Hormuz on your behalf because you depend on it for your energy. But in order to get us to do this, here's what we want in return.
Yeah,
I think he's got them in a really tough spot.
I certainly your bargaining position is increased exponentially with the situation. I think that the Americans have been quite brilliant and quite right to ensure that they have a degree of energy self-sufficiency, and that's something that we could have here in Canada as well. We have tremendous reserves of energy, oil, coal. And our capacity for generating electricity here is virtually endless, both in terms of nuclear power and hydropower.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're sitting energy-wise, we're sitting in the Garden of Eden here in Canada. Okay?
Absolutely.
We have the capacity to have virtually unlimited energy any direction we go. But that's getting a little bit off topic. Again, I hear what you're saying. And, yeah, great, send the bill. But, if the Americans are not there, for better or worse, rightly or wrongly, it's unfair, but if the Americans are not there, the Russians step in, the Chinese step in. Let's say they do exactly what you're saying, Nick. They send their own Navy there to look after their own interests. So can you see the Chinese Navy and the Russian Navy facing off against one another? And do you think that the Chinese or the Russians are going to be as restrained and patient with countries like Iran as the Americans are?
Yeah, good point.
So I think that the Americans being in that region of the world, again, it's not fair. I think that they're quite justified in wanting to have the countries of the region, or the countries that are affected or that benefit the most, send them a bill. I get it, okay? But that notwithstanding, I think that the Americans are a very important and strong force for stability and peace in that region.
I won't argue with that. I think his best card is the we'll do this, but here's what we want card. And because for everything you just said, I agree with you. You don't want Russia being the big boy on the block in that corner, and you certainly don't want the Chinese, because you're right, they won't have the same kind of restraint the Americans do. I just think that he's played this from a tactical point of view or a strategic point of view brilliantly. Now, whether he did it on purpose or it's a fluke, who cares? The situation is, as stated, that now he's in the driver's seat, and that's going to pay big dividends down the road.
Donald Trump in the driver's seat.
Yep.
Before we move on, Nick, my wife and I have been watching this series on not Netflix, but on Amazon Prime, called The Good Fight. And anyone who wants to get their blood pressure up, watching a mainstream television series that is anti-Trump, oh my goodness, this is the one for you, okay? Nick, you're going to have to come over. We're going to have to play a couple of episodes for you, but please take your calm down pills or whatever you're using, your tranquilizers, before you show up.
Great. Can we balance that off with what's Last Man Standing?
Yeah, we haven't been able to find the latest episodes. I don't know where they are, because remember, we don't have terrestrial TV. We don't either. We just have we don't have cable. We just have internet. So if anyone knows where we can get Last Man Standing on the internet,
that's a great show.
The newest episodes, since it went over to, I think it went over to Fox or one of those places,
something like that.
Then leave a message in the comments section, because we definitely want it. Okay.
All right, Joseph. Time for you to ring that bell.
Okay, that bell has rung. So this week I had a piece published by the Post Millennial. Got that right there? The Post Millennial.
Got it.
Right. By the way, the the website address for the Post Millennial, which is an up-and-coming conservative online newspaper. A handful of young people got together. They've put this together. It's a few years old now. And I have to tell you, it's a great piece. It's a great newspaper. It's all online. And if you want the conservative view in Canada on domestic affairs, on culture, on international affairs, on finance, on just about anything, on politics, go to the postmillennial.com. And you'll get it for sure. I highly recommend it. And I'm not just saying that because they published an article of mine or a column of mine, but this column deals, Nick, with the subject of polling and how conservative strategists and conservative voters and opinion leaders in this country misread public opinion polls that tell them that there's a left-wing, liberal, progressive consensus on not just a wide range of issues, but virtually every issue. So what ends up happening is take whatever the issue is, take climate change, which is, what I really focused on primarily in this column. So there was climate change, but take abortion, take same-sex marriage, take government regulation, take the CBC, or the CRTC, and government over-regulation in the media world. And it's reaching now into the internet as well, or trying to with its new proposed digital Bill of Rights. Okay? So you take all of these things, and there's a conservative point of view about them. Climate change is not real. Abortion should be regulated. There shouldn't be on-demand abortion, unrestricted abortion. Marriage ought to be between one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others. The CBC shouldn't exist as a crown corporation or a government organization or anything like that. The government shouldn't be involved in the media market at all. I could go on and on and on. On any of those issues, though, when you do public opinion polling in Canada, there's the sense that there's a consensus that the public believes that climate change is real and it's man-made and we have to do something about it. It's a crisis. The CBC is a wonderful Canadian institution. We have to keep it. Abortion, how dare you think about abortion? Don't even talk to us about abortion. We don't want to talk about it. It's a settled law. Let's not discuss it. Same with same-sex marriage. Same with all of these issues, okay? My argument in this piece is that you look at polling and you automatically think that if we don't go along with that consensus, if we challenge that consensus, if we challenge the premises that consensus is built on, then we have no hope of being elected. So that's basically the dynamic that we see. Now, I have to give credit where it's due because I wasn't aware of this study at the time, but Tom Harris, who, as you know, is now with us on with a podcast. So Tom brought this study to our attention that was published, I think it was in 2000 and, I can't remember. Let me just quickly look it up. I should already have this. Yeah, 2012. So there's a study published in the Journal of Climate Change in 2012, and by researchers at Drexel University, McGill University, and Ohio State University. And the study focused on factors that influence public opinion on climate change, such as extreme weather events, scientific information being available, media coverage, advocacy groups being involved, and what politicians and political parties say on that particular subject. And these researchers found that neither extreme weather events nor the promulgation of scientific information had a significant impact on public opinion, Nick. Media coverage did. Okay, but the real impact came from the positions that politicians took on the subject and political parties took on the subject. In other words, when politicians questioned and refused to bow down to the narrative that climate change is being created by human influence, and that we had this crisis and we had to do something about the crisis, whenever politicians questioned that narrative, the demand amongst the public for action dropped substantially. And those were not unique findings. Those findings were essentially replicated on various subjects with other topics, with the question of whether or not, the influence that politicians and political parties have in shaping public opinion. And so the point I'm making here is that what you have in this country on issue after issue, and it's not just with the federal government or the federal Conservative Party, it's really within the Conservative movement in Canada, and that is this, okay? Conservatives tailor their response to public opinion based on that public opinion. And but the problem is, Nick, just to finish the thought, okay, that the Conservative response to the public opinion is in fact the main driver of the public opinion to which it's responding.
So it's a catch-22.
It's like a vicious circle. It's like a feedback loop on public opinion. And I like to say that, picture a dog chasing its tail.
Right.
The Conservatives are chasing this tail. And what they need to do is they need to stop chasing their tail. They need to decide what the truth is. What is the right position to take, even if it's not consistent with public opinion? They need to challenge the premises of the left. And if they would just do that, stop chasing your tail, stop doing what you're doing, and go out there and defend what you believe in and defend conservative principles and explain to people why what you believe in is correct, that people will follow them and they will shift public opinion.
I've said basically the same thing in different ways over the years. And the way I sum it up is people are crying out for real leadership. Real leaders lead. They don't follow the crowd. And if you're the captain of a ship, the first thing you do is once you're at sea, you tell your navigator to chart a course to your destination. Let's say you're sailing from Halifax to Chatham, England. Okay? Well, it's not the captain's ship to hold the wheel, but it is his job to make sure that they get there. In other words, the minutia of how this stuff gets done isn't so much what's important. It's the fact that you're standing up and saying it needs to be done. I'm watching a series right now called Chernobyl, and it's about the Chernobyl accident back in 1986. 86. And the whole scenario, and if anybody wants to watch it, I highly recommend it. It's kind of like a docudrama. They compress a bunch of personalities into individual characters just because otherwise the cast would be so large that, you wouldn't know who's who. Anyway, but there's a line in that movie, and it was a line that it's going to stay with me. That the scenario was they had to go in to send 3 engineers who knew the bottom end of the reactor and the heat in the water transfer system to keep the reactor core cool like the back of their hands. And they sent them in there. They asked for volunteers. And 3 guys, before they found their volunteers, one of the guys said, you will do this. And you will do this because 50 million people will die if you don't. But more importantly, it needs to be done. And that line, it needs to be done, is what should become the conservative mantra. To be able to stand up in a crowd and say, look, I know this is unpopular, but the truth is, and then state the truth. And more people will follow that because it's clear cut. It has direction and it has power than they ever will. Well, okay, so they changed a couple of words in the anthem, and I'm not going to break the law. They asked, I'm thinking of Andrew Scheer when they changed the words to the Canadian national anthem. To all of us command. And they asked me if he was going to sing the old words. He should have said, of course I am. This is ridiculous. I don't care. This is our national anthem, and I will not let them tinker with it. And he didn't do that. I'm going to obey the law, blah, blah, blah. And it was ridiculous. So people want real leadership, and they're not getting it.
Right. Well, again, leadership is really important. But I just think it comes down to even something more fundamental, Nick, and that is this, okay? if you want to win the argument, and ultimately politics is about winning arguments. That's what politics is all about. Because you want to do things differently when you're in power. Surely to goodness, as conservatives, there's more there's more to who we are as conservatives, and there's more to the Conservative Party, or ought to be more to the Conservative Party, than the mere fact that we aren't liberals. Because how could we say we aren't liberals if we're going to go along essentially with the same things that the liberals go along with minor modifications? Maybe we'll slow things down just a little bit. Maybe we'll do things a little bit more efficiently. And my question is, why in heaven's name would we want to do liberal, progressive policy that we know is wrong? Why would we want to do it more efficiently? It just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
But here's the bottom line, Nick. As I say, politics essentially is about arguments. It's about winning the argument. And you cannot win the argument if you don't make it.
Amen to that, Joseph. You're right. You can't win an argument. You never have. And that, folks,
I
is
feel
the
like
final
it should
bell.
be doing like the time bell or toll.
Well, you know what you could do is, and here they all come.
Did you ever ring the bell in a mess?
No, it's too
Big
expensive.
mistake.
That's too expensive. Because when Joseph and I were in the Navy, there was a bell in the main cafeteria, and if you rang the bell, that's where the bar was too. You had to buy everybody in the mess a drink.
Right. Never ring the bell.
And never wear your hat in. Never wear your headgear in the mess. Same story. End up buying everybody a drink.
Okay, so guys, what did you think of that? Man, my goodness gracious. I'm out of breath.
And that, my friend, is the show.
That is, yeah. My goodness, it passed really quickly, Nick. Okay, so look, ladies and gentlemen, that was the new format. We wanted to make it a little bit more of a compact listening experience for our podcast downloading audience out there. The 2 hours was a long time, so we decided we'd cut it down to an hour. We're going to try this out for a little while. If you have any comments or objections about it, or you think it's great, don't forget to leave us a comment or send us an email. You can always reach us at comments@thecombatzone.ca. That's comments@thecombatzone.ca.
As in statements.
Yes, as in statements, plural. Right. No comments, not statements. No,
Yeah,
comments.
Comments,
Yes,
as in statements.
Yes, put your statement into comments.
Right.
At thecombatzone.ca.
There you go.
And again, congratulations to our new friend on Think Radio, Tom Harris.
He did a fantastic job.
Great job. If you haven't caught his podcast yet, please do. It is
You won't be disappointed.
Exploratory Journeys. And the second episode is already up online, so you'll have a chance to listen to that. So if you're listening to our show live, as we shut things down here in Studio B, the secret bunker, make sure that you go to listen to Tom's podcast. Fascinating stuff. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we bid you adieu for one more week from
See
the
you all
Combat
again
Zone.
next time.
Okay, how do we shut this down? Let's just stop, okay, Nick? Okay, we'll just go right into our idea of the national anthem.